Chapter 226 The Fool. Chapter 226 The Fool. On the evening of the first of the 2 days that they had at their disposal, Sunny climbed all the way to the highest point of the statue and sat there alone, looking at the setting sun. He felt as though he had to find a sense of balance that he had lost at some point along the way. Not because he missed it, but because he was going to need that balance to remain firm and steady when the moment of truth came. If he was right about the future, then this was probably the last day of peace he would experience until this whole thing was over. Not only the expedition, but all of it. Looking back, his behavior in these past few months was highly erratic. Where were the cold rationality and ruthlessness that saved him so many times in the past? The caution and devious cunning that allowed him to survive the first nightmare? He had not been acting like himself for a long time. Yes, his mental state had suffered greatly because of everything that had happened. But was it the only reason? Come to think of it, the first blow dealt to him was the bitter revelation that there was no gateway in the bright castle. After everything that Sunny had endured to make it to the dark city, the crushing intensity of their journey through the labyrinth, the diabolical trap of the soul devourer and their escape from it, the cold and harrowing night of traversing the dark sea, all of it turned out to have been for nothing. Not only were they not rewarded for their efforts, but all of their hopes were mercilessly destroyed and obliterated instead. This alone was enough to drive a person mad. Then came the feeling of alienation he felt while living with Nephis, Cassie, and all the newcomers in the outer settlement. Instead of finding support and solace in the company of his friends, Sunny fell into his old habit. Unconsciously, he turned himself into an outcast to prevent anyone from making him one. This was the most noticeable, but not the only instance of him regressing to his old self. After fighting so hard to change and grow, Sunny ended up abandoning most of the lessons he had learned after becoming infected by the nightmare spell. He was almost like an addict relapsing after a few days of sobriety, and giving up completely because of this one small mistake. But who could blame him? Sunny was already shaking under the pressure of the situation. One little push, and he would fall under its weight. In the end, it was not one, but 3 blows that shattered him completely. As though the world wanted to make sure that he was truly broken. First was the terrible epiphany of what Cassie's vision really meant. Almost instantly after that, while Sunny was still reeling, came the fatal mistake in the conversation with Harper and the brutal murder that followed. And if that was not enough, the person he relied on the most to keep his sanity in this cursed place, Nephis, made it impossible for him to trust her any longer. Anyone would have collapsed under that weight. And yet Sunny managed to keep his balance, even if just barely. The final straw that finally broke him was the excruciating, never-ending sea of torturous pain he suffered after being mortally wounded by the Black Knight. After that, Sunny had relinquished all pretense of having control, and now here he was, playing the fool, acting like a fool, and fooling around with Kai and Effie. Wasn't it fun? Wasn't it easy? Yes, his mental state wasn't great, but it was also very convenient to blame everything on this condition. The truth of it was that Sunny did not try to rein himself in at all. In fact, he welcomed this madness. Being a bit crazy was comforting, simple, and safe. It protected him from having to look at the heartbreaking truth and remember it. Sunny needed the shield of madness to save himself from the bottomless despair that threatened to destroy him completely. So what if he was prone to act recklessly in this state? So what if he made mistakes here and there and took unnecessary risks? Anything was better than having to face that despair. Just like Nephis had said, one had to become a little insane to survive in the world that had gone mad. And yet, Sunny knew that what he was doing was nothing but hiding his head in the sand. And now that the end was approaching, he had to stop hiding from the truth. He had to admit and endure it. This was the only way for him to survive. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon and the absolute darkness drowned the forgotten shore, he sighed deeply and whispered, "All right. All right. It's time to wake up." The next day, 6 humans were standing at the edge of the vast canyon as the twilight of dusk drowned the world in shadows. Far below them, the black waters of the Kher Sea were raging, rising from the depths in a terrifying, obliterating wave. In a few minutes, all light was going to be completely gone. And then, the flood of darkness would wash over the world, destroying anyone left standing in its path. And yet, the humans were not rushing to get away. Instead, they just stood there and waited. Looking down into the canyon, Sonny gritted his teeth and shivered. Then, he glanced at Nephi and licked his dry lips. "Are you sure about this?" Changing Star did not spare him a look and simply nodded. Despite the fact that the rising black water was quickly approaching them, her face was calm and composed. A moment later, the last vestiges of sunlight disappeared, leaving them in utter darkness. The silence that surrounded them was broken only by the sound of waves rushing against the walls of the canyon, getting closer and closer. "Prepare yourselves," Sonny sighed. "Here we go." Suddenly, a blinding burst of white light pierced the darkness. Holding the incandescent sword in her hand, Nephi closed her shining eyes for a second, and then raised the sword high above her head, as if calling the monsters of the depths to come take her. Chapter 227 Comparatively Safe. Chapter 227 Comparatively Safe. The embrace of impenetrable darkness was broken by the furious white light of Changing Star's incandescent sword. Illuminated by it, 6 people were standing on the shore of a raging river. Their faces were pale and grim. The canyon had disappeared, consumed by the rising surge of the black water. Now, the Kher Sea was flowing over its edges, ready to swell and flood the narrow passages of the great labyrinth in an unstoppable wave. Sonny felt cold water wash over his feet and shivered. The rest of the cohort reacted exactly the same. Even Kai, who could escape into the lightless skies at any moment, seemed to be deeply unnerved by the closeness of the encroaching sea. Among the 6 of them, only 3 had truly experienced the perils of this dark abyss. They knew that the real dread came not from the sea itself, but from the terrors that hid in its cursed depths. Like the host of the whispering voices that they had heard beneath the branches of the Soul Tree. Or the gargantuan creature that had almost cost Nephi her life. However, Sonny was not going to make a remark to educate the rest of the cohort. After all, what they were trying to do right now was to summon one of these terrors from below. One that was different from all the others. "Sonny?" Peering into the darkness, he lingered. "I don't see anything yet." The water was already to his shins and rising swiftly. Sonny grimaced and struggled with the desire to turn around and run away without looking back. If he was fast enough, if he was lucky enough, he could still make it to the giant statue before the torrent of darkness drowned him under its crushing weight. Instead, Sonny glanced at Nephi and Cassie. The blind girl had glimpsed this secret of the forgotten shore in her visions and shared it with Changing Star. Changing Star had devised a plan to make use of it. Both of them were confident that they were going to succeed. So, he was going to be confident, too. Sonny didn't fully trust either of his former companions, not anymore. But he trusted their judgment. Just as that thought appeared in his mind, there was a subtle movement at the edges of his vision. Turning his head, Sonny stared into the darkness, and trembled. "It's here!" Out there in the distance, a massive shape was moving through the waves, attracted by the light of Changing Star's incandescent blade. The sea seethed and swirled around it, the black mass of water easily pushed away by the approaching creature. Nephi gritted her teeth and somehow made her flames burn even brighter, forcing the darkness to retreat another dozen steps. "Get ready!" A few moments later, the furious sounds of a massive body moving through the dark water reached their ears. The creature was a true giant, easily towering above the waves even though it was walking on the bottom of the canyon. Well, no surprise. Full of terror and awe, Sonny watched as the thing they were waiting for came closer. Soon, he could discern the general shape of it. 2 hills that rose above water were its shoulders. And right between them, where the head should have been, there was nothing but emptiness. There were 7 headless statues on the forgotten shore, but only 6 marks on the map created by Nephi. Not because she had failed to learn of the 7th one. but because the seventh statue never stayed in one place for too long. And now, that stone colossus was walking through the flooded canyon, his shoulder scraping against one of its walls. The wide chest of the headless giant pushed the water away, creating whirlpools in his wake. Raising one colossal arm, the statue easily destroyed the protruding remnants of the ancient bridge that got in its way. The debris rained into the black waves, disappearing into them without a trace. This was their fast and safe, comparatively, method of traveling to the edges of the forgotten shore. Truly insane, Sunny thought, stunned by the sheer scale of everything that was happening. Come to think of it, it was really ironic. The next day after he had decided to return to some semblance of sanity, something this crazy was about to transpire. It was as though the whole world was mocking him. Shaking his head, Sunny turned to the cohort and yelled, "He's coming!" The black water was already to their knees. The members of the cohort tensed and prepared themselves for what was about to come. They only had one chance to do this. Failure meant death. A few moments later, the massive shape of the stone colossus entered the circle of light created by Nephi's. Its shoulders rose above the waves, close enough to the now invisible shore of the flooded canyon for them to see every tiny crack on the surface of the weathered stone. Now wasting any time, Changing Star ran forward and jumped. A moment later, the blade of her sword hit the surface of the statue and slid deep into it, as if melting the ancient stone. Using the sword as purchase, Nephi started to climb to the giant's shoulder. The other members of the cohort were following closely behind her. Kai was carrying Cassie in his arms, flying to the top of the colossus with no problem at all. Castor seemed to simply disappear and appear a moment later on the giant's shoulder, standing side by side with Changing Star. Only Sunny was having trouble. With him not being very tall and the water level rising with each second, he found it hard to gain enough momentum for a proper jump. Damn, how irritating. However, before he could come up with a solution, Effie simply grabbed him by the collar and tossed Sunny into the air. What? For a few short moments, Sunny was flying. All he could hear was wind whistling in his ears. Then, he landed on top of the giant statue, rolled, and barely prevented himself from falling back into the cold embrace of the dark sea. Before he could even stand up, the mighty huntress landed near him and grinned. Such a light! However, before she could finish the phrase, the stone colossus moved, making everyone stumble and fall. Leaving the ruins of the bridge behind, he turned around and indifferently began walking away from it. He was walking south. Chapter 228 Crossing the Canyon. Chapter 228 Crossing the Canyon. The stone colossus wandered the forgotten shore aimlessly for thousands of years. Cassie did not know what power had brought him to life, nor what he was searching for in the depths of the dark sea. She had seen a vision of the headless giant passing the ruins of the ancient bridge on a certain day, and then traveling south to the very edges of this desolate land. She also knew that the leader of the cohort that had conquered the bright castle pursued the seventh statue across the labyrinth for a long time before leaving on his doomed journey. His reasons for doing so were, presumably, unknown. Sunny wasn't sure that the blind girl had told him the whole truth about the wandering colossus. In fact, he was certain that there was a deeper layer of secrets surrounding the 7 ancient statues and their importance to the riddle of the forgotten shore. However, he was in no hurry to hunt these secrets down. Sunny knew that all 3 of them, Nephi, Cassie, and himself, were bound together to this cursed place. The strings of fate were wrapped around them tightly, stretching far into the future, where the final revelations waited. He was going to learn the truth sooner or later. Until then, Sunny was content knowing no more than he needed to know. The stone giant walked across the dark sea, cutting its surface with his wide chest. The 6 humans were gathered on the circular platform of his severed neck, pressing themselves against the swaying stone. The cold water was spraying into their faces and the furious winds were threatening to throw them off the moving statue into the deadly waves below. Nephi had long extinguished her flames, so they were surrounded by absolute darkness. Sunny was the only one who could see what was happening around them, so his role was to serve as the eyes of the cohort. Using the strength of the shadow to hold onto the slippery stones, he looked forward with a grim expression on his face. Currently, there was only one thought on his mind. Were they going to make it in time? The Colossus was swiftly approaching the other side of the canyon. Sunny could identify it by the remnants of the ancient bridge that were still above the turbulent black waves. However, the water level was rising much faster. "Sunny?" Looking toward Effie, who called out his name, he lingered for a few moments and then yelled, "Prepare yourself! We're going to be underwater for a couple of minutes, at least." A chorus of curses served as the answer. Unseen by anyone, Sunny smiled darkly. This was going to be his second time diving into the Dark Sea. Wasn't this how Gunlog had begun his journey to the throne of the Dark City? Maybe Sunny would be a king himself, one day. Now! The black water rose higher and higher. The shoulders of the giant were already submerged in its lightless depths. The circular platform was going to be next. They were so close to the shore. As the stone colossus moved across the bottom of the canyon, the platform rose and fell. After another fall, it was finally lost beneath the waves. The cold, salty water crashed into them and then swallowed the entire world. The members of the cohort desperately held on to the cracks in the stone, trying to prevent themselves from being washed away by the raging current. And no one would be able to save them if they were. Sunny closed his eyes, knowing that he would not be able to see anything through the impenetrable darkness of the cursed sea. Instead, he relied on his shadow sense, hoping that it was going to help him feel if something approached them from the depths. Now, all Sunny had to do was hold tight and hope that the headless giant would reach the shore of the canyon before he ran out of breath. Thankfully, everyone present was strong and powerful. Their physical form was either at the pinnacle of human ability or slightly above it. Several minutes underwater were not going to kill them, most likely. Placating himself with this thought, Sunny waited, and waited, and waited, struggling against the terrible current with all his strength. At some point, he thought that he sensed an unclear shape swim close to the walking statue, but then the sensation disappeared. Any second now, any second. But the relief he was so desperately waiting for was not coming for far longer than Sunny had expected. Soon, his lungs began to burn, and his muscles began to spasm. Damnation! If he was having trouble, then others must have been in far worse shape. After all, oxygen traveled through human bodies with blood, and their blood had not been altered and comprehensively enhanced by the forbidden legacy of the mysterious Weaver. Just as he thought so, Sunny felt one of the 6 shadows slipping from the circular platform. It was Kai. Crap. Fortunately, before the Colossus plunged into the dark depths, the charming archer had been worried about Cassie and tied himself to her with the help of the golden rope. Surprisingly, the blind girl turned out to be more resilient than him in the end. Now, she was holding both of their weights, desperately grabbing onto a narrow crack in the ancient stone. Kai's unconscious body was floating a few meters behind her. He was safe, for now. But how long would Cassie herself be able to hold on? When Sunny felt his mind weakening, his body was suddenly slammed into the platform with tremendous force. The stone giant was climbing out of the canyon. His massive hands grabbed onto the edge of it, and with one devastating pull, the Colossus threw himself upward. Ugh, curse it! Sunny felt as though he was aboard the worst amusement ride in human history. His bones groaned, being pressed down upon by an invisible weight. A few moments of this torture, and they were above water once again. Desperately grasping for air, Sunny inhaled several times and then weakly looked at the unconscious form of Kai. Crawling toward the archer, he grabbed him and dragged the body back to the rest of the group. Entrusting him to Cassie, Sunny looked down at the dark water below, and suddenly growled in a low voice. Turning her head, Nephis asked with a deep frown on her pale face. "Sunny? What is it?" Looking at the torso of the giant statue, he gritted his teeth and lingered for a few moments before answering. Then, in a voice that was dreadfully grim, Sunny said, "We have a passenger." Chapter 229 The Passenger. The colossus rose from beneath the turbulent waves, rivers of black water streaming down his stone body. Now that the walking statue had climbed out of the canyon, the cursed sea was barely up to its abdomen, for the moment. Once the dark waters reached higher, the giant would be submerged in them up to his shoulders once again. Sunny had to get rid of the unwelcome passenger until then. Far below, flattened against the chest of the colossus, a strange creature had attached itself to the ancient statue. It looked like a cross between a translucent jellyfish and an eel. However, Sunny could see a deformed skeleton of a giant humanoid being trapped within the transparent flesh of the repulsive abomination. He shivered. Compared to the stone giant, the eel looked rather small. However, this was just an illusion. Really, the creature was as large as a train. Its jaws were full of sharp fangs and wide enough to swallow a human whole. Curses. If there was one good thing about the situation, it was that the eel did not seem to be a corrupted nightmare creature, but merely a fallen one. Perhaps it survived in the cursed sea by attaching itself to the true terrors of the depths and feeding off the remains of their prey. As soon as Nephi spoke, Sunny noticed long feelers of the creature tremble and move, as though reacting to the sudden sound. The eel turned its head slightly in their direction. When he answered, the feelers rippled once again, and the monstrosity turned its head once more, this time staring directly at Sunny. Crap! A moment later, translucent tentacles appeared from beneath the abomination's body and shot up, finding cracks in the weathered stone and pulling it toward the neck of the colossus. Where the cohort was. Changing Star must have felt something, because tiny white sparks suddenly ignited in the depths of her eyes. Sunny put a hand on her shoulder and shook his head. Don't. Stone giant or not, lighting a beacon in the middle of the cursed sea was not the best of ideas. Now that it had escaped the confines of the canyon, the real horrors were out and about. Just like the cohort had discussed before, light was their last resort, something they would summon only if the moment came where there was no other choice but for all of them to fight. And whether Sunny liked it or not, that moment was not upon them yet. With a reluctant scowl, he turned away and said, "I'll handle it." The giant eel was his problem to solve. Yeah, that's great and all. But how the spell am I supposed to get rid of this thing? Looking down, Sunny calculated that he had a dozen or so seconds left before it was time to act. The repulsive abomination was slowly crawling toward them, scaling the torso of the giant statue at a disturbingly steady pace. Think. Several seconds later, Sunny approached Effie and kneeled by her side. Taking the huntress by the hand, he put something into her palm and said, "Do you feel the colossus moving up and down? That's his steps. I need you to start counting them. If I'm not back after 30 steps, throw the thing I gave you in that direction as hard as you can. All right?" Effie gave him a nod. Her usual humor was gone, replaced by grim determination. "Good. Well, wish me luck." The huntress lingered for a moment, and then said, "Good luck." When he was ready to walk away, she suddenly gripped his arm. Sunny stopped and raised an eyebrow. "What?" Effie hesitated before speaking. "Listen, Sunny, if you die, I can have your soul shards, right?" He stared at her for a second, his face twitching. "This wench." "Absolutely not. If I die, all my shards are to be thrown into the sea. No one is to get anything, understand?" With that, he left the cohort behind and walked to the edge of the swaying stone platform. Here goes nothing. Jumping down, Sunny slid to the giant's shoulder and caught himself from falling all the way into the raging waves by grabbing onto a crack in the stone. To his right, the shoulder was slowly moving as the colossus swung his hand. To his left, a curved path of stone led all the way across the chest of the statue to its other shoulder. This curving path was, in fact, the collar of the giant's tunic, carved masterfully from stone by the unknown sculptor. Stepping on it, Sunny struggled to keep his balance on the swaying slippery surface and hurried forward. Soon, he was directly above the climbing eel. The abomination was already close, allowing Sunny to discern every repugnant detail of its translucent, giant body. What the hell? Why does everything have to be so disgusting? A moment later, he sighed. Let's try this. Summoning the prowling thorn, Sunny gritted his teeth and cut his forearm, smearing some blood on the blade of the kunai. Then, he used all the strength he had in his body to hurl the dagger down. The prowling thorn spun in the air and hit the giant eel right in the place where its eye should have been. Sunny did not notice any visual organs on the creature's body, but on the deformed humanoid skull hiding beneath the flesh, that's where the eye socket was. The kunai wedged itself deep into the monster's head, causing a small fountain of crimson blood to erupt upward. Of course, such a tiny wound was nothing for a creature of this size. For a moment, everything became silent. Then, hundreds of slender tentacles suddenly exploded from the eel's flesh and shoot in Sunny's direction in a chaotic, slithering mass of translucent flesh. Damn it! Forced to dismiss the prowling thorn to avoid being thrown off the ledge, Sunny lunged forward. A moment later, the tentacles reached his previous position and crashed into the stone, sending shards flying into the air. Sunny kept running, knowing that the tentacles were just a second away from piercing him. The sounds of breaking stone were thundering just behind his back, getting closer and closer with each moment. The prowling thorn appeared in his hand once again. Reaching the end of the path and with nowhere left to run, Sunny cursed, and jumped straight into the darkness. Chapter 230 Precarious Battle. The eel tried to catch him, but was a second too late. Crap! Falling toward the dark waves, Sunny threw the kunai in the direction of the stone giant's hand. Instead of a weapon, the colossus was holding a tool that resembled a mason's hammer. The kunai curved in the air and wrapped the invisible string around its shaft. This is going to hurt. Sunny plunged into the darkness. A moment later, the string drew taut, and he found himself swinging through the air at a terrible speed. Flying underneath the colossal stone fist, he almost touched the black water with his feet, but then the inertia pulled him up and away. After a few seconds of weightlessness, Sunny landed on the hammer's head and let out a shaky breath. Without wasting any time, he dislodged the prowling thorn and pulled it into his hand, then wedged the dagger in a narrow crack on the surface of the giant hammer. Landing on it was one thing. Staying here, though, that was something else entirely. The colossus was swinging his arms as he walked, so Sunny basically found himself on top of a giant pendulum. Not only was the hammer swaying back and forth, but the angle of the surface he was standing on also constantly changed, making it hard not to fly off or slid into the raging sea. Almost kneeling, Sunny held onto the kunai and tried to keep himself from falling. Then, his face pale and grim, he looked up and glanced at the eel. "I'm right here, you slimy worm!" The abomination lingered for a few moments, considering whether it should continue to climb up or follow the sound made by the prey. Finally, it twisted its long, repulsive body and slid over the shoulder of the giant, crawling down his arm. Toward Sunny. Come on, come on! He was hoping that his blood will have the same effect on the giant eel as it had on the corpse eater. Both were, presumably, fallen creatures. If one was poisoned to death by blood weave, why couldn't the other? Sunny had not cut himself with the prowling thorn for the fun of it. Sadly, his blood seemed to have no effect on the eel whatsoever. The monster continued to pursue its prey without showing any signs of being poisoned. So, it's not poisonous, really. It just tore that leech from inside because the stupid thing swallowed a whole lot, and the weave imbued my blood with the odd quality of always being attracted back to the larger mass of it. The corpse-eater's innards were in the way, so… Damn it! His hopes of killing the eel were crushed. Now, Sunny was stuck on the swinging hammer, with his only path of escape blocked by the swiftly approaching abomination. Damn it all! Letting go of the kunai, Sunny summoned the midnight shard and slashed at the slender tentacle that approached him. Even enhanced by the shadow, the blade of the tachi failed to cut the flesh of the fallen creature, and instead simply batted it away. Not good, not good. The eel had two types of tentacles. Some were thick, powerful, and few in number. These ones were used to push its massive body forward and hold on to the swinging arm of the colossus. The other tentacles were slender, long, and numerous. These were the ones that Sunny now had to dodge and fight against. The closer the eel got, the more tentacles assaulted Sunny from all sides. Dodging and deflecting them while maintaining his balance on the chaotically swinging hammer was an almost impossible task. Luckily, Sunny had practiced the firm battle style of the Stone Saint and incorporated it into his own technique. Its steadiness and indomitability were translated through grounded footwork, which allowed him to plant himself on the stone surface of the hammer and refuse to be thrown off or moved even by an inch. Between choking breaths, Sunny couldn't help but think that Nephice was right. The best fighters weren't those who were the strongest, but those who were the most adaptable. The foundational style he had learned from her had served him well on the streets of the Dark City. But if he had continued to follow it narrowly and neglected to add flexibility to his technique by incorporating the Stone Saint's style into it, he would be dead by now. The dream realm was wild, unpredictable, and often defied logic. It threw all kinds of horrors at those unfortunate enough to step foot inside its vast expanse. Take this situation, for example. What kind of a person would imagine that, one day, they would have to fight a translucent eel the size of a train atop a walking stone colossus? Sunny certainly never expected to find himself in such a situation. Only a complete lunatic would. That's why adaptability was the most important trait an awakened fighter could possess. But even though Sunny had taken all the right steps, the seconds he had left to live were numbered. The onslaught of the slender tentacles was already too much for him to handle. And they were only growing in number. 28. With an inaudible sigh, Sunny allowed the shadow to slide off his body and rush toward the approaching eel. Instantly weakened, he gritted his teeth and tried to resist the attacking tentacles as best as he could. One of them hit against the blade of the midnight shard with tremendous force, sending it flying from his hand into the darkness of the night. The other hit him across the chest, causing Sunny to yelp in pain and roll back, almost sliding off the surface of the hammer. Catching himself at the last moment, he pushed away and rolled, barely avoiding being pierced through the chest by the third. He had nowhere to retreat anymore. But it was fine. 29. Back at the circular platform, Effie strained her muscles and hurled the thing entrusted to her by Sunny into the air. It was the ordinary rock. Flying away, the memory suddenly screamed. 30 steps. Its loud scream caused the feelers on the eel's head to ripple. The giant creature suddenly turned its head in the direction of the noise, its terrifying maw opening in hunger. For a moment, it paid Sunny no attention. Its weight also shifted, leaning over the abyss of black water. Right then, a human shadow glided right in front of it, and two crimson eyes ignited in its depths. The Stone Saint stepped out of the shadow, which then instantly wrapped itself around the taciturn monster and filled her with immeasurable power. The shadow's sword flashed. Sunny wasn't trying to kill the eel. Despite all of the Stone Saint's might, she was too weak to slay something that abominable. He just wanted to sever one of the main tentacles that supported most of the eel's weight. Augmented with the power of shadows, the Stone Knight easily cut into the flesh of the eel and sliced one of the thickest tentacles apart. Losing its purchase, the repulsive creature shuddered, and slid helplessly from the swinging arm of the colossus, falling into the turbulent black waves with a splash. Then, it was gone, pulled away by the strong current. Sunny fell to his knees and drew in a deep breath. Then, he said in a cold, raspy voice, "This ride ain't free, bastard. Next time, buy a ticket." Chapter 231 Stone Giant. Sunny remained on the swinging hammer of the colossus for a while, resting and trying to catch his breath. However, very soon, the dark sea rose high enough to make his position perilous. With a deep sigh, he stood up and dislodged the prowling thorn from the stones. Waiting for the colossus to raise his hand, Sunny jumped down. The wind whistled in his ears, and a few moments later, he landed on the wrist of the giant in a roll. As soon as Sonny got back to his feet, the stone's surface beneath plummeted down. Thrusting the kunai in another crack, he gritted his teeth and held on to his dear life. Soon, the ground he was standing on sloped down, and then turned into a vertical wall, with nothing but the dark abyss of the cursed sea visible below. Hanging off that wall, Sonny cursed and waited for the Colossus to bring his arm back up. When it finally happened, Sonny immediately dashed forward. He had several precious seconds before the pendulum swung again, and had to cover as much distance as possible with each swing of the giant's arm. Too slow, and the cursed sea would catch up to him. The closer he got to the elbow of the walking statue, the more inclined his path was. Eventually, Sonny had to climb instead of run. His hands were tired from fighting and supporting his weight, but he stubbornly continued moving forward and up. Once Sonny reached the elbow and climbed higher, the amplitude of the swinging reduced considerably. Now he just had to scale the vertical wall and reach the shoulder of the giant. Climbing the slippery stone was not easy, but he had gotten used to such tasks a long time ago. In any case, it was way better than that time Sonny had to race against the rising sea during a furious storm, only to get swept away by the black water and be saved by Nephi at the last moment. This time, at least, he didn't need her to save his life. That would be embarrassing. Some time later, Sonny climbed over the edge of the circular platform, crawled to its center, and sprawled beside the other members of the cohort, who were waiting for his return with tense expressions on their faces. "Sonny? Are you all right?" Kai was back to his senses, looking a little bit disheveled, but still ridiculously gorgeous. Sonny stared at him in dismay, then sighed. "I'm alive." A short while later, Nephi called out to him. "What were you fighting?" Sonny grimaced. "A big ugly worm. I threw him back into the water." With that, he reluctantly sat up and looked at the surface of the dark sea, which was already flowing over the shoulders of the stone giant. Its surface was black and tranquil. No one was pursuing them, it seemed. "It's gone now, so rest up. I'll keep watch." He stayed awake until the break of dawn, and then woke the members of the cohort. When they rose to their feet, Sonny lay down on the cold stone and tiredly closed his eyes. Yesterday, he had thought that he would not be able to fall asleep atop the walking stone giant. However, Sonny had underestimated how exhausting this long night would end up being. Even the body of a powerful sleeper needed rest. Actually, the swinging of the stone platform was sort of soothing. Soon, he was fast asleep. When Sonny woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. Yawning, he sat up, summoned the endless spring and greedily drank some water. Someone had left a plate of food near him, so without thinking too much, Sonny picked it up and had himself a late breakfast. Ah, that hits the spot. Recognizing the taste of Neff's cooking, he glanced at their intrepid leader and smiled. It was nice to laze around while others were working. While Sonny was sleeping, the stone platform had transformed. Plates of iron stripped of the abominable spiders and stored in Effie's bag were inserted around its perimeter, with the golden ropes strung between them as an improvised railing. More of these plates were shaped into makeshift rods and placed in the center to serve as throwing spears in case the cohort was attacked from the air. Currently, Kai and Effie were building additional battlements on the left shoulder of the giant, while Nephi observed their progress from above. They were taking no chances. A trip through the labyrinth, no matter how fantastical, was still full of danger. It was better to be safe than sorry. Sonny scoffed. So much work. What's the wars? No. I'm not going to finish that thought. No thanks. On the stone beside him, the shadow applauded sarcastically. Shaking his head, Sonny finished his food in silence, and moved to the edge of the platform to look down at the vista of the forgotten shore. Far below, the landscape of the labyrinth was slowly moving past them. The stone giant was marching south, indifferently crushing mountains of crimson coral under his feet with each step. The view was simultaneously hypnotic and depressing. In every direction, as far away as Sunny could see, there was nothing but red coral, with rare heights protruding from it into the gray skies here and there. The forgotten shore was truly vast, and every inch of it was full of unspeakable dangers. Not too far from him, Castor was also busy studying the landscape. However, his interest wasn't purely idle. Changing Star's map was on the stones beside him, and the proud legacy was drawing new marks on it from time to time. Sunny sighed. The cohort might have caught a ride on the shoulder of the stone giant to reach their destination at the edges of the forgotten shore, but they were going to have to walk all the way back to the Dark City by themselves. That was months of traveling through this treacherous Hell's Cape, with nothing but their own strength and wit to keep them alive. The information Castor was putting on the map today was going to be priceless to them in the future. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, Sunny deserved a little respite. Turning away from the handsome young man, he lowered his gaze and peered at the sights below. It was not every day that one got an opportunity to enjoy a beautiful view of hell. Chapter 232 Before the Storm. In the next few hours, Sunny did nothing but leisurely gaze at the vistas of the labyrinth. While monotonous, they were still picturesque and breathtaking. The forgotten shore was a harrowing, but beautiful place. The somber gray sky and the black earth created a perfect backdrop for the vibrant crimson sea of twisting coral blades. Here and there, strange landmarks broke the dullness of the landscape, igniting the flames of curiosity in Sunny's heart. After all, he was nothing if not a passionate explorer. Provided most of his explorations ended with something dying at the end of his blade. But still, out there in the depths of the labyrinth, Sunny saw many things that piqued his interest. The skeletal remains of colossal monsters, with signs of ferocious battles written in the marks on their bones. Broken wrecks of giant vessels, with terrible breaches in their mighty hulls. Abyssal chasms that were full of darkness and emptiness, leading into the depths of this cursed land where true horrors dwelt. And things he couldn't even describe, let alone identify. He even saw several vast ruins that must have been entire cities once. Now, only unclear shapes of magnificent buildings remained, overgrown with crimson coral and barely resembling anything made by a human hand. He didn't know if they had existed before or simultaneously with the Dark City. Regardless, it seemed that no other human settlement on the forgotten shore had withstood the curse of darkness as the cursed city had. They were all destroyed and devoured, first by the crimson coral, then by the ruthless flow of time. Now, no one was left to remember that these proud cities had ever existed. The 7 heroes that created the Starlight Legion were described as those born in all-consuming darkness. That suggested that humans had resisted the curse for a while, at least. Maybe the Dark City was built long after the darkness had devoured this land, as the last sanctuary and fortress for those who remained. A lot of good had that done, in the end. His reverie was broken by Cassie, who suddenly turned south and frowned. Her quick movement drew everyone's attention. Sunny instantly had a bad feeling. Nephi's turned to the blind girl and frowned. "Cassie? Do you feel something?" Cassia lingered for a few moments and then said, her voice uncertain, I think a storm is coming." Sunny looked at the sky, which like always was covered in a gray veil of clouds. Nothing seemed to indicate that there was going to be a tempest turning it impenetrably dark and furious soon. But that was just how things worked on the forgotten shore. Storms came out of nowhere and destroyed everyone unfortunate enough to be caught in their murderous embrace. If Cassie said that she felt one approaching, then it was. Their oracle had a good track record of sensing such things. Damn. A storm meant that the cursed sea would rise from the depths earlier than usual. It also meant that there would be rain and lightning, which would make the behavior of the dwellers of the depths unpredictable. It also meant hurricane winds, and that was really bad news when you were stuck on a moving colossus 200 meters above the ground. Nephi gritted her teeth. "You heard her. Prepare." However, the blind girl interrupted her. Wait! There is something else. Changing Star lingered for a moment, then asked. You are sensing another threat? Cassie scowled, then said in a strange tone. No, not sensing. I can hear something strange. It's like a rustle. Everyone stared at her for a few seconds, trying to understand the meaning behind her words. Strangely, Kai was the first one to react. Suddenly pale, he spun around and summoned his bow. Before anyone could understand what was happening, something whistled in the air, and a dark shape forcefully crashed into the stone platform, smearing it with blood. A black arrow was protruding from its body. Sunny jumped out of the way and gasped, stunned by the force with which the monster impacted against the stone. It had to have been in a long dive before being pierced by Kai's arrow, mere moments away from snatching one of them away. The creature looked somewhat like a giant locust. Its body was covered in black chitin and comparatively small, no bigger than that of an adult human. Its wide wings were thin and transparent. As it convulsed in death throes, the wings moved, threatening to push the members of the cohort off of the platform. Nephi dashed forward, grabbed the disgusting creature, and threw it down. Kai was already grabbing another arrow. There was an expression of panic on his face. Sunny blinked. Why is he panicking? The monster is already. As though hearing his thoughts, Kai glanced at the members of the cohort with wide eyes and yelled. Swarms! These fiends hunt in swarms! Get ready! Before he could finish, Sunny was already summoning the Midnight Shard and the Stone Saint. Dead? By now, everyone could hear the rustling sound Cassie had told them about. It seemed to be coming from nowhere, surrounding them like a wave. For a few moments, nothing happened. The members of the cohort tensely stared up. Why? Suddenly, a black dot appeared in the gray clouds and swiftly fell down, covering the distance to the neck of the Colossus almost instantly. Before it could attack, though, Effie's spear collided with it. The giant locust practically exploded, sending a rain of blood splattering against the stone back of the Colossus. But by the time the huntress dismissed her spear and before she had the time to summon it again, there was another dot, and another, and another. Kai shot one more creature out of the air, while Castor used a strange sling he summoned from his soul's seed to break the wings of another. Nephi raised her sword and yelled, Cassie! Wind! Flinching, the blind girl began to call upon her wooden staff. While white sparks of light were still weaving the shape of it in her hands, the quiet dancer flew out of its scabbard by itself and flashed into the air, piercing an approaching locust clean through. A few moments later, a powerful gale shot from the wooden staff into the skies, slowing the attacking locusts down and sending them staggering. One of these stragglers somehow managed to land on the platform and immediately jumped at Sunny. Changing his stance on the fly, Sunny slashed with his sword, decapitating the repulsive creature. However, because of the inertia, the massive body continued to move forward, slamming into him at great speed. With a curse, Sunny flew back and fell over the railing. Sliding on the stone, he rolled down to the stone giant's shoulder and caught himself on the part of the defensive fence built by Effie and Kai. Then, he stood up and spat a mouthful of blood. A moment later, Sunny froze, his eyes widening. Because of the tumble, he accidentally looked down to the ground. What he saw there made him shiver. Numerous dark shapes were appearing from the labyrinth and jumping at the Colossus, swiftly climbing up his giant stone body. Chapter 233 Swarm. As the members of the cohort killed several giant locusts, their repulsive black bodies fell to the ground, raining blood on the walking Colossus and the crimson coral of the labyrinth. As soon as their corpses hit the ground, it suddenly moved. Dark figures appeared from beneath the mud, rushing at the dead locusts to devour them. Hundreds of monsters were suddenly competing for the few scraps of meat. After several bloody fights broke out and the winners were decided, those who had not gotten to satiate their hunger turned their heads and followed the smell of blood. Right back to the moving stone giant. Looking down with dark resentment, Sunny saw numerous creatures jumping at the legs of the walking statue from the mounds of coral, and quickly climbing up. They were headed right to where the cohort was being besieged by the swarm of winged abominations. He couldn't see the shape of them clearly, but there was no doubt that these monsters were bad news. Damnation! Slain an awakened beast, Flesh Reaver. Your shadow grows stronger. Turning around, Sunny summoned the prowling thorn and hurled it upward. A moment later, using the invisible string as support, he was flying through the air. Grabbing onto the edge of the circular platform, he hoisted himself up and once again faced the carnage. The kunai flashed, cutting the wing of one of the locusts clean off. Suddenly crippled, the creature toppled and plummeted down, no doubt to be devoured by the horde of nightmare creatures approaching from below. The battle with the swarm was not going too great for the cohort. The turbulent winds summoned by Cassie's staff bought them some breathing room by making it hard for the locusts to approach the platform at high speed, but there were just too many of them. Kai was setting one arrow after another loose. After that one first shot, he had not used the blood arrow, choosing instead to rely on his mundane ones. In the chaotic mess of this sudden battle, it was too easy to miss. Plus, he didn't need a lot of power to deliver debilitating wounds to the locusts. They were basically skewering themselves on the arrows themselves by diving from the skies with incredible speed. Still, the abominable reavers were awakened beasts. It wasn't easy for a sleeper to kill one with just a single shot. Just as Sunny grabbed the kunai and spun to avoid a glancing blow from one of the creatures, another one landed on the platform. 2 arrows were sticking from its cracked chitin, but the locust was still alive. Not for long, though. Just a moment after the repulsive bug landed, Nef's sword flashed through the air, slicing it in half. Sending the mangled body off the platform with a powerful kick, Changing Star turned to Kai and yelled, "Don't try to kill them! Break their wings!" With a sudden light of understanding in his eyes, the archer changed his approach. Indeed, that made sense. The members of the cohort didn't need to slay the locusts. They just needed to make it so the flying scourges weren't able to reach the stone platform. Effie, meanwhile, did not need this advice. Everything she hit simply exploded into a disgusting puddle of bloody goo. The problem the huntress faced was that there was no powerful ranged weapon she could use. Her beautiful spear was not really suited to be thrown that often. The memories were created from soul essence. Once a memory was dismissed, that essence returned to the core of the awakened that had summoned it. However, if it was too far away from them, the essence was simply wasted, unless the memory had a special enchantment like that of the blood arrow. The essence wasn't lost forever, as it would slowly accumulate inside the soul core until the peak capacity was reached once again. But this process took time, so one could not endlessly throw their memories at the enemy during a battle. Especially not once they reached a rank where managing one's soul essence was of higher importance. Effie had not reached such a rank yet, but she was still limited by that principle. That's why she resorted to using makeshift darts fashioned out of plates of spider iron. There wasn't much of them left, however. Once the last dart was gone, she would have to either exhaust her pool of soul essence or risk fighting the attacking locusts in melee. Just like the Stone Saint was doing right now. As Sunny rushed toward Nephi's, he noticed the shadow lowering her shoulder and raising her shield. In the next moment, one of the repulsive creatures crashed into it at full speed, and simply crumbled, black blood exploding into the air through the cracks in the shattered chitin. You have slain. The huntress, however, did not have the benefit of weighing a literal ton. Despite her graceful appearance, the saint was made out of stone, and stone was much heavier than flesh. It was also much harder to rip and slice apart. Once Effie was forced to fight the locusts with nothing but her spear and shield, her life would be in real danger. Curses, curses, curse it all. Swiftly approaching Changing Star, Sunny kicked a disgusting piece of a killed creature off the platform and yelled, "We have a problem!" Nephi sharply looked at him and scowled. "What? Dash?" Sunny hesitated for a moment, and then gestured down. There's a couple of hundred labyrinth creatures crawling all over the Colossus. They'll be here pretty soon. Nephi gritted her teeth, then glanced at the members of the cohort. Cassie was holding the wooden staff, sending powerful bursts of wind into the sky to slow down the attacking swarm. The quiet dancer was flashing through the air, protecting her from the locusts to the best of its ability. Castor was spinning his strange sling, aiming at the wings of the repulsive creatures. His face was calm and grim. Everyone was barely holding on, and one mistake away from death. With a dark look in her cold gray eyes, Nephi looked at Sunny. Then she said, "Come with me, then." Chapter 234 Horde. Chapter 234 Horde. Briefly giving Castor a few instructions, Nephi walked over to the edge of the platform and looked down. When she saw the numerous creatures climbing the stone giant, a grim expression appeared on her face. Sunny weighed the prowling thorn in his hand and asked, "So, what's the plan?" Changing Star glanced at him and smiled darkly. "What else? Kill as many as you can." With that, she jumped down and landed softly on the shoulder of the Colossus. With a sigh, Sunny followed. Figures. A moment later, they separated. Nephi dashed to the opposite side of the moving statue, running on the wide stone path of its collar. She was going to try and deal with those creatures that were climbing the front and the left side of the giant. Sunny was going to have to stop those coming from the right and the back. He wasn't sure that just two of them were going to be enough to cover all that space, but they didn't have a lot of choices. Sunny and Nephi at least had the high ground advantage against the enemy. Those fighting against the swarm of monstrous locusts, however, did not. The cohort couldn't spare anyone else for this task. Looking down, he was finally able to discern the shape of the attacking labyrinth dwellers. They looked like massive primates covered in dirty, gray fur. Their arms were strong and muscular, easily pulling their heavy bodies up the ancient stone's surface. Each had a mouth full of sharp teeth, with two curved tusks protruding from it, as long as daggers. The most disturbing fact about these beasts was that there were crimson flowers growing from within the bloody gaps in their flesh. Some even had pale stems slithering from one eye socket to another. With a shiver, Sunny realized that this tribe of nightmare creatures were simply hosts for a different, much more terrifying one. The primates were nothing but meat puppets for those ghoulish flowers. Oh gods! Summoning the ordinary rock, Sunny wrapped his body in the shadow, strained his muscles, and threw it down as hard as he could. The small rock plunged through the air and collided with one of the creatures far below, hitting it right in the forehead and splitting its rotten skull apart. Not paying any attention to the fact that half of its head was missing, the primate continued climbing up. Sunny gritted his teeth and dismissed the rock. Just as I thought. Nothing could ever be simple on the Forgotten Shore. The cohort would never be just attacked by a swarm of flying abominations. There had to be a horde of monstrous primates attacking them from the ground, too. And gods forbid those powerful beasts were not parasitized by even more ghastly horrors. At least their bodies are not so tough due to their partially decomposed state. That was something he could work with. Just as the first primate climbed into the range of the prowling thorn, something thundered above Sunny, and in the next moment, he was doused from head to toe in fetid black blood. A mangled corpse of a giant locust flew past him and fell down. Sunny frozen for a second, then growled, "I am a walking target now, aren't I? Well, great. Let them come. The more, the merrier." Extending the invisible string to its maximum length, Sunny aimed and hurled the kunai down. He guided it by ever so slightly pulling on the string. The dagger flashed through the air and spun, drawing a curved path. A few moments later, it cut across the wrist of one of the menacing primates, cleanly severing its hand. Suddenly losing purchase, the beast instantly fell down. After plummeting from the deadly height, it hit the crimson corals below and practically exploded into bloody chunks. Sunny listened to the emptiness, a tense expression on his face. "You have slain an awakened monster, Blood Flower. Your shadow grows stronger." A relieved expression appeared on his face. At least these things weren't indestructible. Raising a hand, He caught the returning kunai and instantly threw it again. There wasn't much time left. Countless beasts were climbing up the stone body of the ancient colossus, covering a frightening amount of distance with each second. He had to slaughter as many of them as he could before they reached the battlement constructed on the giant's shoulder, or else they were going to rip him apart. In the next few minutes, Sunny did nothing but control the prowling thorn as it flew through the air, cutting through flesh and bone alike. The heavy kunai never stayed in his hand for more than a second, reaping a bountiful harvest of lives. More than a dozen beasts, those who were ahead of the approaching horde, were thrown off the statue and fell to their deaths, rewarding Sunny with an enviable amount of shadow fragments. However, he was still too slow. Sunny had to be both swift and precise when throwing the dagger, lest he wanted to be pulled off the giant's swaying shoulder himself. What's worse, he had to constantly pay attention to the sky and dodge the attacking locusts when they dove from above to devour him. The horde of terrible beasts was getting closer and closer, their arrival as inevitable as it would be fatal. The situation got even worse when another group of them reached the gargantuan statue's back. Now, Sunny not only had to deal with the monsters climbing its side, but also rush from his perch on the shoulder of the steadily moving colossus to the treacherous path of his collar to prevent the fastest climbers from reaching too high. Bad, bad, this is bad. Covered in blood and with his muscles burning, Sunny continued to slaughter the ghastly beasts as fast as he could. But he wasn't fast enough. At some point, Sunny realized that the climbing monstrosities were now mere meters away from him. He could see every disturbing detail of their rotting bodies, with strangely graceful flowers growing from the bloody gaps. Their crimson petals trembled as they smelled prey. Suddenly, one of the primates strained its powerful legs and jumped into the air, instantly covering the remaining distance to Sunny's position. Before it could land, however, the midnight shard slashed the creature across its massive body, cutting it apart. What flowed out of the terrible wound, however, was not blood, but a vast cloud of red pollen. Before Sunny could register the fact, he had already breathed in a whole lungful of it. His eyes widened. Oh no! This is not good. Chapter 235 Flower Boy. Chapter 235 Flower Boy. As the red pollen settled in his lungs, Sunny suddenly sensed something subtly moving inside them. Then, a wave of excruciating pain pierced his chest. With a loud scream, he fell to his knees and grabbed at the puppeteer's shroud. A stream of blood escaped from his mouth and splashed on the ancient stone. In it, tiny blooms were sprouting roots, greedily drinking the crimson liquid and growing with visible speed. Looking at them with dark resentment, Sunny gritted his teeth and slowly stood up. By the time he straightened his back, the pain had subsided a little. The bloodthirsty flowers were already turning black and dying, destroyed by the odd blessing of the bloodweave. The insidious nightmare creature tried to devour him from inside, but really it just signed its own death sentence. In a few short minutes, it would be destroyed completely by the furnace of his tenacious body. And even if some part of it survived, Nef's purifying flames were going to finish the job. Until then, he would just have to endure this torture. Come closer, you bastards! As the midnight shard appeared in his hands, another monster was already climbing onto the shoulder of the walking colossus. Lunging forward, Sunny brandished his sword and decapitated the foul creature, then kicked it in the chest to send it flying down. A moment later, he jumped back, narrowly avoiding being grabbed by another primate. Before the beast could even react, the razor-sharp Tachi flashed across its body, severing both of its arms. More red pollen burst into the air. Holding his breath, Sunny shifted his stance and attacked once again in one swift, fluid motion. The midnight shard pierced the knee of the massive primate, making it topple. The creature wasn't dead, but any kind of mobility it once had was pretty much gone. Good enough, but it didn't really matter. 3 other monsters were already there, ready to take the fallen creature's place. And a few seconds later, there was going to be even more of them, and then even more still, until, eventually, Sunny was torn apart by the unstoppable flood of these harrowing fiends. He would have to think of something before that happened. If only I could breathe. Fighting through the excruciating pain that was tearing him from inside, Sonny grimaced and dashed forward to face the enemies. In the next minute or so, he forced himself to cut out all unnecessary thoughts, turning into a ruthless hurricane of steel. The midnight shard danced from one nightmare creature to another, piercing, slashing, and severing their rotting flesh. The air was soon obscured by a vast cloud of red pollen. At some point, Sonny gritted his teeth and disengaged from the fight, leaving a carpet of bleeding bodies in his wake. Launching himself back a few meters, he slid on the stone and left the cloud of red mist. Only then, finally, he allowed himself to draw in a deep breath. Sensing that their enemy was gone, the primates rushed forward. However, a moment later, something glistened in the mist, and a heavy triangular blade suddenly pierced the head of the leading creature. The blood flower did not react to its host being damaged and continued its lunge. But in the next second, the head of the monstrous ape was violently jerked backward, and losing balance, it fell down. The string of the prowling thorn was coiled around the support pillars of the makeshift battlement, creating an invisible trap. By moving forward with the kunai still stuck in its skull, the unfortunate creature pulled the string taut, causing an invisible net to rise into the air. Entangled in it, half a dozen creatures tumbled to the ground, blocking the others from pursuing Sonny. Neither the battlement nor the invisible string were going to last long, but at least it bought him a few seconds. You have slain an awakened monster, Blood Flower. Your shadow, finally. The nightmare creature in his lungs was finally dead. Spitting out a mouthful of blood, Sonny groaned, wiped his lips, and glanced back. What he saw made him curse. The group of monstrous primates climbing the back of the Colossus was about to reach the collar of the stone tunic. Sonny was about to be surrounded. And he was all out of ideas. If I die today, I am at least going to drag as many of you as possible with me into a deeper, darker hell. Prepare yourselves, gangrels. Lunging forward, he ran on the narrow stone path and got to the middle of the giant's back just in time to collide with the first of the advancing primates, and send it flying all the way down to the distant surface of the labyrinth. Unlike the shoulder of the Colossus, Sonny had no room to maneuver on the narrow path. In fact, he was having trouble simply keeping his balance due to the constant swaying. But the primates, with their wide shoulders and mighty frames, were in an even worse situation than him. On that narrow stone path, one man would be able to stop an entire army, provided that nothing attacked him from behind, of course. Which was bound to happen. Cursing, Sonny slashed and slashed, sending one monster tumbling down in a billowing cloud of red pollen after another. Despite all his efforts, he had to retreat step after step to avoid being surrounded and killed by the ferocious abominations. The situation was becoming desperate. Especially so because the creatures that had been slowed down for a bit by the string of the prowling thorn finally wrestled free of it, and were seconds away from reaching his current position. Damnation! Sending a primate that was facing him staggering with a devastating blow of the midnight shard, Sonny desperately spun to deflect the attack from the creature approaching him from the back. However, he was a fraction of a second too late. Realizing that he won't be able to block or dodge the paw of the monstrous ape, Sonny feverishly tried to come up with a way to minimize the damage, at least. But just as the claws of the creature were about to grab onto his neck, a swift shadow suddenly fell from the skies. Catching the primate with its sharp mandibles, one of the locusts easily tore its head off and dashed back, devouring the prey with terrifying speed as it flew. In the next moment, more flesh weavers fell from the skies, aiming at the climbing primates. The two tribes of nightmare creatures were suddenly locked in a ferocious battle, with the 6 humans hopelessly stuck in between. Chapter 236 Ex Machina. Chapter 236 Ex Machina. With his back to the stone surface of the ancient statue, Sonny stared as the two tribes of nightmare creatures clashed in a cacophony of eerie roars and rustling noises. Discovering a new target, swarming locusts swiftly fell from the skies and cut into the horde of the blood flower hosts, devouring scores of unfortunate primates in mere moments. torn and eviscerated by the sharp mandibles, their flesh seemed to almost melt in the terrible maws of the flying abominations. However, the massive beasts were not entirely defenseless. Any locust that lingered for a fraction of a second more than it should have was immediately grabbed and torn to pieces by the powerful primates, its black blood falling like dew on the petals of the crimson flowers that grew from their rotting bodies. Some hosts even jumped off the colossus to grab onto diving reavers and tumbled together to the distant ground. In just a few seconds, the surface of the ancient giant and the air around him was consumed by utter chaos. Indifferent to everything, the colossus steadily marched south. "Come to your senses." Shaking off his astonishment, Sonny swiftly finished off the primate that he had staggered a second before and pushed the heavy creature from the narrow path. Despite the fact that their enemies were now fighting each other, the pressure on the cohort did not decrease. In fact, it only grew heavier. Cursing under his breath, Sonny threw the midnight shard at another lunging monster, turned his back to the enemies, and jumped. Grabbing onto a crack in the ancient stone, he pulled his body up and nimbly scaled the neck of the ancient statue. For several seconds that seemed to last an eternity, Sonny was completely defenseless against the potential attacks by the monstrous locusts. However, to his luck, Nephis had chosen that exact moment to unleash her flames on the other side of the statue. A blinding flash of white drowned the skies for a second, confusing the reavers and buying him enough time to reach the stone platform. Climbing over its edge, Sonny rolled away and sprawled on the cold stone, trying to catch his breath. His body was in agony. The blood weave might have destroyed the flower growing in his lungs, but the damage was already done. Sonny had trouble breathing and felt bloody foam bubbling on his lips. Every time he inhaled, a sharp pain pierced his entire being. Not too terrible. Although troublesome, these wounds were not going to kill him. Sleepers heal better and faster than mundane humans, and Sonny in particular was also transformed by the drop of Weaver's ichor, making him much tougher and harder to kill than most. Sort of like a cockroach. As for the pain, he had been through worse and survived. As long as Sonny had adrenaline numbing it to some degree, he was capable of giving a fight still. Not that it would be pleasant. With a moan, Sonny picked himself up from the ground and looked around. Things were slowly turning from bad to worse. Kai was long out of arrows and had to resort to using his morbid ascended memory. Judging by how pale his face was, he had already missed a few shots, losing a lot of blood as the result. Cassie was still trying to maintain the powerful winds that slowed the attacking locusts down, but her face and hands were covered in blood. It seemed that even the powerful enchantment of her armor and the ardent protection of the quiet dancer were not enough to fully save her from harm. Effie was now fighting the flying abominations in melee, having only a fraction of a second to react every time they attacked her. Blood was streaming down her legs, her white chiton torn and soaked with it. Her bronze helmet was gone, lying shattered on the stones. Castor did not seem to be wounded, but his face was dark with exhaustion. Maintaining his incredible speed was taxing on both the mind and the body, so he would not be able to last much longer, either. The Stone Saint was the Stone Saint. The taciturn shadow was covered in black blood from head to toe and completely indifferent to it, which only enhanced her dark and menacing visage. She continued to move with elegant grace, protecting the members of the cohort to the best of her ability. But she couldn't be everywhere all at once. And then there was Sonny himself, who was in the worst shape out of all of them by far. Curses. And the worst news was that now that he had to retreat back to the platform, the abominable primates were about to follow him, forcing the cohort to defend itself from two sides simultaneously. Even worse still, unlike Sonny, the other members didn't have blood weave to protect them from the red pollen. Bad, this is bad, just as Sonny was thinking that thought. A bloodied hand suddenly appeared from the other side of the platform. A moment later, Nephis slid under the golden rope and shakily rose to her feet. Changing Star had white flames dancing in her eyes. Her skin seemed to shine with a soft glow, as though there was fire burning beneath it. That fire, if Sonny had to guess, was responsible for annihilating the red pollen as soon as it entered her body. The Starlight Legion armor was heavily damaged and seemed to be on the verge of melting, but still held, protecting the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan to the end, not paying any attention to the members of the cohort. Nephi's turned her head and looked south. What is she, before Sunny could finish the thought, he was distracted by the sight of an ugly primate head rising above the edge of the circular platform. Cursing, he grabbed a jagged piece of chitin laying nearby and shoved it into the creature's eyes, forcibly pushing it back down. At the same moment, an especially large locust suddenly fell from the sky. Batting the quiet dancer away, it dove right for Cassie. Before anyone could react, its mandibles clicked. However, instead of soft flesh, all they caught was the hard wood of the enchanted staff. The blind girl had managed to defend herself at the last moment. The impact was still strong enough to throw her far back, nevertheless. Breaking the improvised barrier with her back, Cassie screamed, and slipped from the platform, plummeting down like a broken doll. No! The prowling thorn was damaged and restoring itself in the Soul Sea, and the golden rope was tied around the platform. He didn't know what to. As the sound of a bough clattering on the stone reached his ears, Sunny saw Kai diving down from the neck of the Colossus. Flying with incredible speed, he caught up with Cassie and grabbed her by the arm. The two of them froze in the air for a moment, absolutely defenseless against the approaching locusts. No, no, no! But the fatal attack never came. Suddenly, the cacophony of the battle died down, turning into deathly silence. Sunny blinked. Several locusts were hovering in the air mere meters away from Cassie and Kai, but they were in no hurry to devour the helpless humans. In fact, they, too, seemed frozen. A moment later, the locusts suddenly turned around and dashed away. In fact, the whole swarm was swiftly retreating, flying away from the stone colossus with as much speed as the gluttonous abominations could muster. It was as if they were fleeing from something. Many of the locusts were carrying dead primates in their claws. It seemed as though the Reavers were the ultimate victors in this terrible battle against the monstrous apes. But Sunny was pretty sure that, soon, the whole tribe of these terrible creatures was going to have crimson blooms growing from the cracks in their chitin. Blood flowers were truly a horrifying enemy. Who knew what they would be capable of after subjugating a whole swarm of flying abominations? The more pressing question, however, was, what were the locusts running from? Sunny looked down, only to realize that the giant primates were also retreating, rushing down the body of the ancient statue in something that almost resembled panic. Then, finally, he turned and looked south, following the line of changing stars' gaze. His face paled. Out there, directly in the path of the walking statue, an inconceivably vast wall of furious darkness had devoured the whole world. It was swiftly moving in their direction, bolts of lightning illuminating the raging depths of clouds almost every second. The storm was approaching. Chapter 237 Wall of Darkness. Chapter 237 Wall of Darkness. Kai landed on the stone platform, gently placing Cassie down. The blind girl was deathly pale and visibly hurt, but her life didn't seem to be in danger. The archer smiled reassuringly and gripped her shoulder. Then, just like the rest of them, he turned his head and silently looked south. A wall of impenetrable, furious darkness was approaching from there, devouring vast spans of the labyrinth with each second. To Sunny, it felt like an endless ocean of deranged shadows was rushing to drown them. The pressure he felt was almost as bad as that of the ominous Crimson Spire. The Colossus was marching toward the darkness, completely indifferent to its menacing oppression. The wind rustled Sunny's hair. In the stunned silence, Effie suddenly fell to her knees with a pained groan. Her hands were pressed against the breach in her archaic cuirass, bright blood streaming from beneath them. That sound brought everyone back to reality. With a grim expression on her face, Nephi's walked over to the wounded huntress and gently placed her hands on her body. A moment later, soft white radiance shone through the cracks of Effie's armor, healing her wounds and taking the pain away. Changing Star closed her eyes and bit her lip. drops of crimson blood rolling down her ivory skin. To take away her companion's suffering, she had to endure a much more harrowing torture. Sonny coughed, bloody foam flying from his lips, and weakly lowered himself to the ground. He didn't feel too well. The wall of darkness was growing closer with every moment. The wind was picking up, whistling in the cracks of the ancient statue. It brought the smell of the sea with it. Sonny grimaced and commanded the stone saint to walk over and stand above him. "What are we going to do now?" Kai shivered, glanced at the raging wall of clouds, and said, "Climb lower? The lightning is bound to be drawn to the neck of this giant." Sonny shook his head. "We can't. The sea is going to rise, so most of the statue will be submerged underwater. We will be lucky if the waves aren't high enough to reach this platform." The archer sighed and looked down. "So then, we're dead?" Sonny smiled darkly. "Don't worry. Stone doesn't conduct electricity too well, so we will be safe from lightning. Most likely. What you should really be afraid of are the things that all that commotion might attract." After that, he bent over in another fit of painful coughing. "Ugh, that stings a little." By that time, Nephi's was done healing Effie. Walking over, she kneeled and looked at Sonny. Unexpectedly, there was an expression of sincere worry on her face. Did you inhale that pollen?" Sonny tried to grin, but ended up coughing up more blood instead. "Yeah. A little. But don't fret, it's not. There are no flowers growing in my lungs. Anymore." Neff's face twitched, and she outstretched her hands to place them on Sonny's chest. However, he caught them in the air with his own and stopped her. Her skin was soft and cool to the touch. "Don't bother. I'll be fine. Take a look at Cassie instead." Changing Star stared at him for a few moments. Then she suddenly asked, "But doesn't it hurt?" He pushed her hands away and shook his head. "Not as bad as it going to hurt you." Nephi's frowned. "I am used to it." Sonny looked at her for a long time, his expression hard to read. Then, he said evenly, "I know. But I don't want you to be used to it. You shouldn't be. Especially not on my account." The weight of the things he left unsaid hung between them for a few moments. Nephi titled her head slightly, then turned away. Finally, she sighed, lingered for a few seconds, and walked away without saying another word. Sonny lowered his head and remained motionless for a while. Better, it's better this way. Being afraid of pain was the most human emotion there was. He couldn't help but feel that every time Nephi silently endured the terrifying torture of her flaw, a part of her humanity was burned away by the merciless purity of the radiant white flames. He didn't want to see it happen, not to mention that he was the last person in the world that Changing Star should have been helping. Because, suddenly, a deafening thunderclap rolled over them, forcing the members of the cohort to flinch. The light of day dimmed, and a cold wind furiously crashed into them, bearing drops of salty black water with it. Done checking up on Cassie, Nephi glanced forward and scowled. They were almost out of time. "Get ready! Hold!" With that, she summoned her sword and held it with both hands. As the incandescent light ignited the silver blade, Changing Star thrust the sword deep into the stone, melting it. Kneeling down, she gripped the sword and prepared for the onslaught of the storm. But he sighed, Effie sighed and grabbed onto a crack in the stone with one hand. With the other, she drew Cassie close and hugged her. Castor followed their leader's example and used his enchanted yen to anchor himself to the platform. Sonny glanced at them and grimaced. Standing above him, the stone saint discarded her shield and lowered one shoulder, preparing to withstand the hurricane winds. Without anything better to hold on to, Sonny hugged the thigh of his shadow and closed his eyes, embarrassed by the indignity. Before he could really revel in it, though, something plopped on the ground near him. Opening one eye, Sonny was surprised to see Kai. "What? What are you doing here?" The archer smiled with embarrassment, and coughed. Well, you see. I don't have a sword that can cut stone or Herculean strength. So, mind if I hold on to the other thigh of your beautiful stone companion? Sunny glared at him for a couple of seconds and then scoffed. Fine. Whatever. Just don't grab onto me by mistake. As the endless wall of darkness approached, the headless colossus steadily walked forward and then dove straight into the furious embrace of the harrowing storm. Chapter 238 Into the Storm. Chapter 238 Into the Storm. A stray drop of rain fell on Sunny's cheek. The howling of the wind grew louder. A moment later, the whole world suddenly darkened, and he was assaulted by a furious gale. The water pelted him in the face, drowning the curse. Sunny was about to yell, Damn! The storm descended on them with terrifying violence. The corpses of repulsive locusts that were left on the platform suddenly moved. Then, picked up by the wind, they were thrown off the neck of the steadily walking colossus, disappearing into the darkness. Their black blood was washed away by the torrent of rain. A blinding flash of lightning pierced the veil of clouds, followed by a deafening thunderclap. As the stone became slippery and wet, Sunny felt his body being forcefully pushed away from its surface by the gale. Gripping the stone saint tighter, he gasped and grimaced. Pain pierced his damaged lungs. Worst amusement ride ever. Fortunately, the heavy shadow was not moved by the tremendous pressure of the hurricane. Firmly planting herself on the surface of the platform, she turned her torso and lowered a shoulder, cutting the wind with her solid stone body. To her side, Nephi's, Castor, and Effie were desperately holding on against the assault of the hurricane. With some effort, they were also able to resist it, but the worst was still to come. Hidden from the sun, the dark sea was rising from the depths. Sunny could hear the deep rumbling of the black water rushing through the twisting passages of the labyrinth and washing over the mounds of crimson coral. Soon, the stone giant was walking through it, creating a furious whirlpool with each step of his gargantuan feet. Another lightning tore the skies apart, illuminating the world made of nothing but wind, water, and darkness. Hit by an especially violent gust of wind, the stone saint slid a few centimeters back and sent Sunny's heart into a momentary panic. The stone giant walked forward. After a while, the black water covered his knees, then his abdomen, then his chest. Following a long and torturous span of time spent holding onto the shadow and enduring the onslaught of the storm, Sunny saw the raging waves flowing over the broken battlements on the shoulder of the ancient statue. His face became grim. During the previous night, the dark sea had not risen high enough to reach the stone platform they were sheltering on. However, with how high the waves were, things were bound to change. As though answering his thoughts, a massive wave crashed into the neck of the colossus, washing over the platform. The members of the cohort were hit by a wall of blackness and instantly drenched from head to toe in salty seawater. Luckily, no one was washed away, for now, the howling wind, the furious onslaught of rain, the constant flashes of lightning and the violent cacophony of thunderclaps were already enough to instill in them the feeling that the whole world was about to split apart and crumble. With the dark waves rising to strike at the stone platform over and over again, the situation became truly disastrous. And yet they held on. Minute after minute, against all odds, the 6 humans clung to the ancient stone, refusing to be taken away by the raging tempest. Sunny didn't know how much time had passed or how far the stone giant had walked into the depths of the storm, but there was no sign of it growing weaker. In fact, it was only becoming more ferocious and terrible. However, this wasn't even what he was really afraid of. His true fear hid not in the skies that had gone mad, but in the lightless depths of the cursed sea, and soon, inevitably, his worst fears came true. With a harrowing sense of premonition, Sunny suddenly lowered his head and gazed down, as though trying to see through the mass of ancient stone. Deep beneath them, he felt a gargantuan shadow rising from the depths. One of the unspeakable terrors of the dark sea was crawling from whatever abyss that had spawned it to face the marching colossus. Curse it all! Looking up, Sunny saw Kai desperately clinging to the stone saint beside him. For once, the archer did not seem dazzling. He was just wet, pale, and scared out of his wits. Behind him, Nephice was kneeling on the stones, gripping the hilt of her silver sword, her fingers white and bloodless. Straining his hurting lungs, Sunny yelled, "Be ready!" The duel. However, before he could finish, her eyes suddenly grew wide. Swiftly turning around, Sunny saw a gargantuan tentacle slowly rising from the seething waves. Illuminated by a flash of lightning, it looked like a tall, grotesque black tower. It pierced the skies and froze for a moment, looming over the ancient colossus. Feeling his heart skip a bit, Sunny realized that he knew the sight of it. This was the same gigantic black tentacle he saw on his first night on the Forgotten Shore, the one that had effortlessly pulled the enormous monstrous shark under the waves and tore it in halves like a little fish. The abomination that even corrupted nightmare creatures were afraid of. Falling from above, the gargantuan tentacle crashed on the moving statue and coiled itself around its neck. Oh no! Before Sunny could react, the gigantic tentacle was already wrapped around the neck of the colossus. Its bulbous flesh suddenly contracted, as though trying to strange the stone giant, and pull him beneath the waves. Without ever slowing down, the ancient statue continued to walk forward. Then, in a roar of falling water, its colossal hand rose from the depths of the cursed sea and grabbed onto the tentacle. Grasping it in his stone fist, the colossus lingered for a moment, and easily tore the tentacle apart. Sunny's eyes widened. One part of the gigantic black tentacle convulsed and slid off the neck of the ancient colossus, falling into the raging waves. The other part stubbornly tried to coil around his arm, but was pushed away by the stone palm and disappeared back into the depths of the cursed sea. For a few moments, the black water was silent. Oh, gods! And then, the whole surface of it suddenly exploded into the skies. Chapter 239 Clash of Titans. Chapter 239 Clash of Titans. The surface of the cursed sea seethed and boiled, then exploded into the skies. Following the disappearance of the gargantuan tentacle, 6 others appeared from beneath the black waves. They rose and loomed above the marching colossus like twisted mountains, blocking the clamor of the storm for a fleeting moment. Sunny gritted his teeth and stared at the terrible image, trying to comprehend the scale of the approaching battle. How were tiny humans supposed to survive the fight between titans? A second later, the tentacles collapsed from the skies to assail the stone giant. Because of their size, it seemed as if they were moving in slow motion. However, Sunny knew that it was just an illusion. 4 of the arms of the unseen Leviathan submerged back under the water to coil around the legs and the torso of the colossus, while 2 remaining ones slithered toward his hand. The ancient statue continued to walk south, seemingly unperturbed by the furious assault of the terrifying dweller of the depths. It batted one of the tentacles away, and allowed the other to wrap around its wrist. "Hold fast!" Sunny didn't register whose shout that was, but followed the advice and grabbed onto the stone saint even tighter. Curse it all! In the furious roar of thunder and blinding lightning, the stone giant suddenly staggered and slightly careened to the side. The tentacle that was coiled around his wrist had tensed, trying to pull the hand down. The power hiding in its black, oily, bulbous flesh was so harrowing that several cracks appeared on the surface of the ancient stone. It almost looked as though the wrist of the colossus was going to snap and explode into a torrent of shards. Instead, the giant turned his palm and grasped the tentacle, then squeezed it in an obliterating grip. The tentacle was trying to crush the ancient stone while being crushed in the fist of the stone giant in return. For a few moments, it wasn't clear which creature was more devastatingly powerful. But then the fingers of the colossus slowly submerged into the black flash, sending rivers of dark, fetid blood spilling down into the sea. Soon, the tentacle was torn to shreds and had to retreat. However, the other 5 were already attacking the colossus from below. Sunny couldn't see through the black waters of the cursed sea, but he could vividly imagine 2 of them coiling around the legs of the ancient statue, 2 wrapping around its torso, and another one holding down the hand and the mason's hammer. Whatever the gigantic tentacles were doing seemed to have worked. The pace of the walking statue slowed, as if it had to struggle against an unimaginable weight that was dragging it back. The colossus staggered once more, then suddenly lurched forward, and finally stopped. Not good. Through the soles of his feet, Sonny could feel the vibrations running through the ancient stone. The giant was trembling, as if straining to move his colossal body with all his strength. The circular platform they were hiding on slowly began to slope to the side, allowing even more waves to wash over it. The furious storm grew even stronger, as though celebrating the battle between two enormous creatures. The hurricane wind crushed into the cohort, pelting them with rain and seawater. The thunderclaps merged into one continuous, deafening roar, and the flashes of lightning were surrounding them like a net woven from celestial flame. Suddenly, the ancient statue shuddered and changed its angle. It was almost as if the colossus was bending his waist and leaning forward. Sonny's eyes widened. He instinctively understood what was about to happen. He wasn't the only one. As the stone saint followed his command and fell to her knees to thrust a hand into a crack in the stone, Nephi screamed, "We're going under! Hold your breaths! Here we go again!" In the next second, the colossus leaned forward and dove under the turbulent surface of the waves. Sonny barely had time to inhale deeply. Then, the cohort was once again in the cold embrace of the cursed sea. Only, unlike the previous day when they had to cross the canyon, this time they were being pulled deep into the void of darkness instead of across it. Feeling a powerful current rush past him, Sonny held on for his dear life and waited. If he was right about what the colossus was doing, they still had a chance to survive. As the pressure of the black water grew heavier and the cold of the lightless void seeped into his bones, the circular platform suddenly stopped and swayed lightly. Despite being submerged deep underwater, Sonny could hear a loud, indescribable sound spreading through the vast expanse of the cursed sea. Gods, gods. Even though he knew that the gods were dead, he couldn't help but call out to them. But all that answered him was silence. Then, finally, the body of the colossus swayed once more, and suddenly began to move up. With the same speed that they were pulled into the depths, the cohort was now being lifted from the darkness of the cursed sea back into the furious embrace of the storm. Sonny was barely conscious by the time the shoulders of the colossus broke the surface of the water, and the circular platform appeared above the waves. Glancing around, he counted the members of the cohort, and made sure that no one was washed away during this harrowing dive. Then, he steeled himself and turned his head to peer forward. The ancient giant had not been pulled into the black water by the unseen horror of the depths. Instead, once the gigantic tentacles had proven to be a nuisance, he had simply leaned forward and scooped the abyssal creature from the bottom of the sea. And now the colossus was holding it in his hand, rising the leviathan into the raging skies. Even knowing that gazing upon the true appearance of the horror of the depths was not the safest of ideas, Sonny couldn't help but look. What he saw made him shiver. Chapter 240 Shadow Slave. Chapter 240 Shadow Slave. Held in the ancient statue's hand was a gargantuan skull that looked almost like that of a human, but simultaneously vastly different. Apart from the size, the shape of it was all wrong. If Sonny had to describe what exactly was different about it, he would have trouble putting it into words. But everything about the skull screamed of wrongness, malignity, and evil. The vile aura it radiated was almost palpable to the touch. Sonny suddenly felt nauseous and weak, as if just looking at the gargantuan skull was seeping the life out of him. This sensation was somewhat similar to that he had experienced when trying to read the runes describing the unknown, only magnified by 1,000 times. The most prominent and obvious difference, though, was that the gargantuan skull had 3 eye sockets instead of 2, the third one situated above the other ones, right in the middle of its forehead. Its canines were also more prominent and heavy than that of a human. The lower jaw of the skull was missing, and it was from there that the 7 gigantic tentacles protruded. Surprisingly, looking at the tentacles themselves did not have the same sickening effect on Sonny. With a sense of dark astonishment, he realized that the horror of the depths was using the terrible skull as a shell, hiding inside of it like a weak and vulnerable sea creature would. Only, of course, nothing weak or vulnerable would have ever survived the corruption of these ancient bones. In fact, he could see the black oily flash bulging from the dark chasms of the skull's 3 cavernous eye sockets. In a flash of lightning, Sonny noticed that the tentacles were moving, coiling themselves around the arm of the stone colossus. 3 of them were heavily damaged, but the remaining 4 were still full of unimaginable power. Their combined strength was more than enough to shatter the ancient stone. Despite the fact that his arm was already starting to crack, the colossus seemed indifferent to the devastating embrace of the abyssal creature. What is he doing? As if answering his question, the dark sea suddenly surged and split apart, releasing the stone giant's other arm from its cold depths. With rivers of black water streaming from it, the hand of the colossus slowly rose, reaching all the way into the raging skies. The hurricane winds broke against it, powerless to move the arm of the colossus even by a centimeter. The hammer gripped in his hand was suddenly enveloped in a ghostly blue glow. No, it wasn't really a glow. In were arcs of electricity running all over its surface. They were the harbingers of. Sonny's eyes widened. In the next moment, a bolt of lightning connected the hammer to the skies. And then another, and another. Dozens of lightnings landed on the stone hammer in short succession, the roar of thunder almost shattering the whole world. Enveloped in the raging shroud of electricity, the ancient stone heated and turned incandescently bright, emanating a furious orange glow. For a moment, everything was still, and then, with the same calm indifference, the colossus brought his burning hammer down and delivered a devastating blow to the abhorrent skull. The beak of the hammer easily shattered the ancient bone and sank deep into the flesh of the horror hiding within. Sonny stared, paralyzed by awe, but in the next moment, he was thrown back by a terrible, ear-piercing, cacophonous wail. That wail was like nothing that a living being should ever have been able to produce, and much louder than even the deafening thunder tearing the raging skies. It came from the dweller of the depth, whose body was deeply wounded by the stone colossus. Peering at it, Sonny saw a vast wave of dark blood gush from the terrible wound delivered to the abyssal creature. No, not blood. It was something different. What flowed from the body of the horror of the depths was nothing but pure darkness, and the wall of it was heading right for them. Suddenly, Sonny was overwhelmed by a sense of mortal danger. What? To the rest of the cohort, the darkness spilling from the terror's body must have looked no different from the tenebrous mass of storm clouds that surrounded them, the black surface of the sea, or even the fetid blood of the giant locusts that they had slain earlier. But Sonny, who could see through any shadow, knew instantly that it was not the same. Because his gaze could not penetrate the lightless, undulating surface of it at all. Somehow, he was certain that if that darkness touched their bodies, all of them would be done for, doomed to a fate 100 times worse than death. The kind of fate he couldn't even conceive of, let alone imagine. Twisting his body, Sonny opened his mouth and screamed as loud as he could. Neph! Light! There was no more than a second left before the wave of darkness washed over them. If Changing Star was late even by a moment, or wasted time thinking over his words and deciding whether she should listen to him, but she didn't doubt. As soon as Nephi's heard the unreserved panic in Sonny's voice, she instantly summoned her flames and channeled them into her sword. A blinding white radiance suddenly enveloped the cohort, pushing the blackness of the storm away. When the wave of true darkness that flowed from the abyssal creature's wound touched the pure light, it simply ceased to exist, disappearing like a vestige of nightmare in the brightness of the day. Sonny exhaled and fell to the stones, drained of all strength. Glancing forward, he saw the ancient colossus remove his hammer and indifferently drop the harrowing giant's skull back into the surging waters of the cursed sea. The black tentacles weakly convulsed and unwrapped themselves from his arm, disappearing into the waves a few moments later. Without paying them any attention, the ancient statue lowered the hammer and continued its march south. It was as if nothing had happened. Sonny gritted his teeth and gathered whatever endurance he had left to grab onto the stone saint once again. The storm was still not over. However, somehow, it didn't seem as frightening and dangerous anymore. Indeed, nothing else happened to them. Hours later, the raging winds grew weaker, and the torrent of rain slowly turned into a light drizzle. The veil of tenebrous clouds was slowly torn apart, and the rays of sunshine shone through the tears. The storm was over. Lying on the cold stone surface, Sunny stared at the sky and grimaced. Comparatively safe, my ass. Chapter 241 Halfway. Chapter 241 Halfway. As it turned out, the cohort had endured the fury of the heavens for almost an entire day. Before the storm had appeared, the night had still been far away, and now, it was already a new morning. The Colossus was steadily marching south, completely unshaken by his terrifying battle with the abyssal Leviathan. Sunny was growing more and more certain that the ancient statue, while brought to a semblance of life by some unknown power, was not truly sentient. The headless giant was more like an echo than a living thing, but then even echoes seemed to possess some remnants of a personality. At least his poor scavenger had one. Quiet Dancer often behaved like a prudish and cantankerous young woman, too, no matter how strange it was to describe a flying rapier in that way. Not to mention Shadows, who were much more alive than Sunny felt comfortable admitting. Compared to all of them, the Colossus seemed rather lifeless. Just what kind of a being was he? Sprawled on the ground, Sunny glanced sideways and observed the stone saint, who was standing indifferently at the edge of the platform. He wondered what this living statue thought of her strange colossal sibling. Was she in awe of him or didn't care one way or another? It was hard to tell. But then again, he was not in the mood to think too much right now. Sunny was truly exhausted and hurting all over. Everyone was, really. Despite the incredible achievement of surviving the onslaught of 2 entire tribes of nightmare creatures, the storm, and an encounter with an actual horror of the depths. Or rather, because of it, the members of the cohort looked truly pathetic. Each of them was either laying on the stone surface of the swaying platform or sitting with a lost look on their face. They were all wounded, tired, and wet. Even Kai had lost his usual luster, and that alone screamed of how rough this recent hardship had been on them. Even when compared to the usual ruthless reality of the Forgotten Shore, well, no matter. They had survived. More than that, if Sunny wasn't wrong, the stone giant had already brought them more than 1,000 kilometers to the south. And by the evening, that number was going to double. A quick way to travel across the labyrinth, indeed. In 2 days they were going to traverse 10 times more ground than Sunny, Nephias and Cassie had managed in 2 months of their bloody journey to the Dark City. And they had only achieved that much thanks to the desperate decision to travel by boat. Not bad, even if they had to endure a few hours of pure torture and a couple of near-death moments. Plus, the speed wasn't the only benefit that riding atop the ancient Colossus had brought them. With a subtly satisfied expression, Sunny listened to his body and smiled. Even without summoning the runes, he knew that he was once again at the same level as he had been before creating the Shadow Saint, and even above it. But there was no harm in looking, right? As the shimmering runes appeared in the air in front of him, Sunny found the familiar cluster, and blinked. Shadow fragments, 494/1000. This is, what? Although he knew that the battle against giant locusts and ghastly flowers brought him a bountiful harvest of fragments, he was still astonished to see just how many he had gained. In the short span of time after Cassie had warned them about the coming storm and before the wall of darkness appeared on the horizon, Sunny managed to reap more than 100 of them. 132, to be exact. Incredible. Most came from the blood flowers. In a direct confrontation, Sunny would have never been able to kill that many, but yesterday, all he had to do was cause their hosts to plummet to the ground and let gravity do the rest. Between those sent to their deaths by the prowling thorn and those he had cut down with the midnight shard, about 24 abominations had died by his hand, and another one by his blood, but Sunny didn't want to even think about that experience, ever again. Each of the ghastly flowers was an awakened monster, bringing him 4 fragments per kill. With the addition of a dozen or so locusts slain by the stone saint, Sunny ended up with this mind-boggling windfall. Not only did he return to his peak form, but he was now stronger by just shy of 100 shadow fragments. All in a day's work. Still stunned, Sunny couldn't help but shake his head. If this continued, he was going to come close to fully saturating his shadow core by the end of this expedition, which was one of the reasons he had joined it in the first place. But before today, his ambitious plans had been just a conjecture. Now, they were becoming reality. By accumulating 1,000 fragments and saturating his core, Sunny was also going to learn yet another secret of his divine aspect. What exactly was going to happen once the runes showed? Shadow fragments, 1,000/1,000. He was now almost halfway to finding out. But even that wasn't all. Looking at another cluster of runes, Sunny read Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Ordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, and right after that, 2 new sets glimmered in the air, Blood Blossom, Dark Wing. 2 new memories. Jackpot. The only thing that slightly ruined his exhilaration was the fact that, recently, Sunny was having trouble finding memories that were actually useful to him. Of course, the Stone Saint had a ferocious appetite and could consume anything that he wasn't going to incorporate into his arsenal. But simply feeding his spoils to the shadow, while rewarding in its own way, was not as pleasant as acquiring a new powerful tool. With a sense of cautious anticipation, Sunny concentrated on the new memories. Well, let's take a look. Maybe it's something useful after all. Chapter 242 New Toys. Chapter 242 New Toys. Sunny decided to take a look at the Darkwing first. Let's see what my shadow brought me. He looked at the glimmering runes. Memory, Darkwing. Memory rank, Awakened. Memory tier, I. Memory type, Garment. Memory description. This cloak is as light as a dragonfly's wing, and as durable. Sunny stared at the description, his eyes twitching. Cloak? Another damn cloak? And what does the spell mean, as durable as a bug's wing? Those aren't durable at all. Taking a deep breath, he calmed himself down and read at the runes again. Well, maybe it has an incredible enchantment. Memory enchantments. Glide. Enchantment description. Allows one to levitate slightly above the ground and slowly move in any direction, or glide down softly from any height. Sunny frowned slightly, thinking about whether that memory could be useful. Then, he dove into the Soul Sea and summoned the sphere of light containing the Darkwing to take a look at its spellweave. The descriptions provided by the spell were not always very informative. It was better to study the thing himself. At first glance, the ability to fly was nothing short of incredible. Amazing, even. Sunny had heard that there were memories that gave their owners literal wings, but never expected to encounter one before becoming an awakened, or even a master. However, their usefulness differed from case to case. There were questions of height, speed, and control. No memory could have given someone the ability to fly as fast and as unrestrained as Kai could. But some came close. However, as far as these memories went, Darkwing turned out to be of the lowest standard. It seemed that it only allowed a person to levitate or hover a couple of meters above ground and move with a very, very modest speed. Sunny could achieve pretty much everything that such an ability provided with the help of the Prowling Thorn and its invisible string, and do it better, too. Of course, he couldn't fight while using the kunai to swing around on the string. In that regard, this new memory was better. However, after imagining himself fighting while using the Darkwing to hover above ground or even worse glide in the sky, Sunny shuddered. The beautiful transparent cloak indeed looked like a pair of dragonfly's wings. It was extremely thin and brittle. The slightest strike would rip it apart, causing the wielder to plummet down. So, unless Sunny wanted to die, using this memory in a battle was out of the question. In short, it had little utility value compared to the Prowling Thorn and couldn't be used for aerial fights. Sunny glanced at the Stone Saint. Should I feed it to her? But after thinking about it for a couple more seconds, he shook his head. No, despite all its flaws, the Darkwing was still a real boon. The ability to glide alone was priceless. With it, he did not need to be afraid of falling down from deadly heights, like from the height of an ancient walking colossus, for example. I'm keeping it. The thing would only give his shadow one fragment anyway. Looking up, Sunny noticed a transparent cloak that looked like a pair of dragonfly wings suddenly appear on Cassie's shoulders. The sunlight refracted through it, making the wings glimmer slightly with all the colors of the rainbow. With an expression of wonder on her face, the blind girl made the wings move. A moment later, they disappeared into a blur, and Cassie suddenly hovered a few centimeters above the ground. She giggled. So, the quiet dancer had earned her the same memory his shadow had earned him. This was good. While the weak levitation ability was mostly useless to Sunny, to the blind girl, it would be of tremendous help. The terrain of the Forgotten Shore was often uneven and treacherous, so being able to float above it was a true gift for someone who could not see. Sunny smiled softly and looked away. It's nice that she still knows how to laugh. A moment later, his expression darkened. Closing his eyes, Sunny sighed heavily and turned his attention to the second memory he had gotten. Don't think about it. Memory, Blood Blossom. Memory rank, Awakened. Memory tier, 2. Memory type, Charm. Sunny's heart skipped a bit. Charms were a rare type of memories that took the form of a small accessory, most often an amulet or a talisman. Unlike weapons, armor, and tools, they obviously had no practical value. However, charms made up for it by possessing unique and powerful enchantments. Among the elite awakened, these were the memories everyone hunted for the most. And now he got one. Please be good, please be good. Memory description. No matter how much blood was spilled, her hunger only grew. Sunny blinked. Creepy. Memory enchantments, Flower of Evil. Enchantment description. This beautiful charm imbues all memories and echoes of its wielder. As Sunny read the description, the runes suddenly changed right before his eyes. After a moment, a new one appeared between them. Frowny face. This beautiful charm imbues all memories, echoes, and shadows of its wielder with an unquenching thirst for blood. They receive an overall enhancement when used against a bleeding foe, and grow more powerful the more their prey bleeds. Not even paying attention to the way the spell changed the runes on the fly, Sunny froze. Aura. It's an aura enchantment. Aura enchantments were an extremely rare thing. Unlike the usual enchantments, they affected not only the wielder, but everything that fit their target criteria in a certain radius. No need to mention how precious such things were. And Sunny didn't just get an aura charm, but also one that provided a comprehensive augmentation to the power of all his memories, echoes, and shadows, as long as his enemy bled, and the more they bled, the stronger that augmentation would grow. Beautiful. Sunny was so stunned that he accidentally whispered that word out loud. A moment later, he suddenly shuddered and quickly glanced around to make sure that Effie wasn't anywhere near him when he had said it. To his relief, the huntress was on the opposite side of the platform, working on the map of the Forgotten Shore. Sunny exhaled and furtively wiped the sweat off his forehead. Phew. That was close. Then, a wide grin slowly appeared on his face. With a satisfied sigh, he rested his head on the stone and thought, "Sorry, Saint. Today you shall remain hungry." Chapter 243 Fangs of the Dragon. By the middle of their second day of traveling through the labyrinth atop the ancient colossus, an ominous dark line appeared on the horizon. With every minute, it slowly grew closer. Pretty soon, Sunny was able to tell that they were headed toward a vast mountain chain. The mountains seemed to serve as a border between the Forgotten Shore and the rest of the Dream Realm. They were tall and jagged, piercing the skies like the fangs of a giant dragon. Their distant peaks were covered in pristine white snow and wrapped in a veil of mist that streamed into the ravines and onto the ridges below. This was the place where the first lord of the castle had disappeared all those years ago, as well as the goal of their own perilous journey. As the stone giant came closer to the mountains, Sunny finally understood just how tall, magnificent, and imposing they were. Even the Colossus himself looked like a tiny ant in front of these towering peaks. It was hard not to feel small and insignificant in their oppressive shadow. Slowly, the terrain of the labyrinth began to rise. The mounds of coral grew smaller, the distance between them increased, until finally there were as much black soil and stone outcroppings visible beneath as there were islands of vivid crimson. Finally, the blades of coral became scarce. It was as though the labyrinth was reluctant to approach the foothills of the misty mountains, or simply unable to. As the gargantuan statue approached the border of the crimson forest, its steps slowed. The Colossus seemed to be struggling to move any further. His body was slightly bent, as if he was fighting against strong wind or some invisible force that was relentlessly pulling him back into the labyrinth. Even his prodigious might was not enough to defeat the pull of the ancient curse. Finally, the stone giant staggered and stopped. This was the moment they were waiting for. Castor, Effie and Nephias were already climbing down, while Sunny, Cassie and Kai stood at the edge of the circular platform. Looking down, Sunny sighed and glanced at the charming archer. "If this doesn't work, you're going to catch me, right?" Kai raised his elegant eyebrows, then smiled at him dazzlingly. "Why, of course. It would be my pleasure." Sunny's eye twitched. Shaking his head, he summoned the dark wing and turned away. Immediately, a cloak in the shape of two transparent wings appeared on his back. If there was one thing calming Sunny down, it was that his shadow was already on the ground. He had sent it down in advance to scout out the landing zone and make sure that nothing was waiting for the members of the cohort below. The stone saint was now standing there, looking like a tiny black dot from the height of the ancient statue's neck. No sense in prolonging this. Gritting his teeth, Sunny commanded the dark wing to raise him above ground, and stepped into emptiness. For a moment, he was consumed by primal fear. But then Sunny felt that instead of plummeting down to shatter on the rocks, his body was smoothly gliding through the air. He was still losing altitude, but at a safe and pleasant pace. Two transparent wings had turned into a blur behind his back. Actually, this feeling was exhilarating. Pendant OVL, COM trying to keep a wide smile from appearing on his face, Sunny reminded himself how brittle his wings were and tried to control the direction of his descent. All it took was a slight shift of his posture and a mental command to the dark wing. Soon, Sunny was gliding down in a wide spiral, enjoying the feeling of wind whistling in his ears. It's a shame that others can't experience this. Initially, he was planning to take Effie on the ride of her life. With Kai and Cassie carrying the other two members of the cohort, reaching the ground would have been really easy. However, after a little bit of experimentation, they had found out that memories left behind by the terrible locusts couldn't carry too much weight. Even supporting Sunny himself was already close to the dark wing's limit. So he got to enjoy this pleasant feeling of weightlessness all by himself. After a few minutes of smooth gliding, Sunny softly landed near the stone saint and looked up. Kai and Cassie were right behind him, and slightly above, already reaching the knees of the Colossus, were the other three members of the cohort. This memory might be better than I gave it credit for. Still not usable in a battle, but very handy nevertheless. Soon, they were all reunited in the shadow of the ancient statue. A few moments later, the Colossus trembled. Slowly it turned around and took a giant step. The ground trembled as his feet landed on it. The 6 humans stood silently, watching the ancient statue walk away. It was heading east, moving parallel to the impregnable wall of the Draconian Mountains. Sunny suspected that the stone giant had walked all around the forgotten shore thousands of times, and now was at the start, or the end, of another loop. The stone saint was watching the headless giant walk away, too. Sunny glanced at her, wondering once again if his shadow felt something toward this enormous creature. He got a strange sensation that she did. However, it wasn't all as Sunny had suspected. If anything, the hint of emotion hiding deep in the ruby eyes of the stone saint was that of disdain. Curious. Back at the ruined cathedral, Sunny had noticed that the Black Knight's armor bore a visible resemblance to that of his taciturn shadow. However, it didn't seem as though both came from the same source. It was more like the armor of the fallen devil was derived from that of the living statues. Almost as if someone had tried to replicate their armaments, but only managed to create a lesser facsimile. Was the stone giant the same? A failed attempt at repeating the same miraculous act of creation that had put a spark of true life into the stone saint and her brethren? There was no way to know. But still, soon he couldn't help but wonder. Soon, the ground stopped trembling and the figure of the mechanically marching Colossus disappeared into the grey fog. A few moments later, Nephi sighed and turned around to face the mountains. It was time to find a place to spend the night. Tomorrow morning, they were going to start their search for the lost expedition.